Why do British Guards wear those tall black hats? The hidden history behind them.
The hats that remembered a battle on the morning of June 18, 1815. The fields near a small Belgian village called Waterloo were already thick with smoke. Rain had turned the ground to mud the night before, and now thousands of men stood facing each other across it, waiting. At the center of it all was a name that had haunted Europe for over a decade: Napoleon Bonaparte. For years, his most elite soldiers, the Imperial Guard, had never lost a single battle. They were the best of the best, hand-picked, hardened, and almost mythical among their enemies. Napoleon guarded them carefully, using them only when victory was certain. He rarely risked them, but today would be different. By late afternoon, the battle had dragged on for hours, and neither side had broken. Napoleon, growing desperate, made a decision he had avoided his entire career. He sent his Imperial Guard forward. All 18,000 of them marched up the ridge toward the British lines, their tall bearskin hats swaying above the smoke, a wall of fur and steel that had never known defeat. Waiting for them, lying flat in the mud behind the ridge to avoid cannon fire, were the British First Foot Guards. They had been ordered to stay low and silent, hidden from view, while the French cannons roared overhead. Then came the moment. As the Imperial Guard crested the hill expecting an open field, the Duke of Wellington rose from his horse and shouted across the line, "Now, Maitland! Now's your time." Over 1,400 British Guards rose up out of the mud in a single motion, forming a line 250 meters long. They fired. The volley tore through the French ranks. Combined with charges from other regiments nearby, it was too much even for Napoleon's finest. For the first time in their history, the Imperial Guard broke and ran. It was the beginning of the end. Napoleon's army collapsed into retreat that evening. Within weeks, he would surrender and be exiled to a remote island in the middle of the Atlantic, never to return to power again. A trophy worth wearing in. The hours after the guns fell silent at Waterloo, the battlefield was a scene of exhaustion and disbelief. Smoke still hung low over the churned mud, and among the wreckage of Napoleon's shattered army lay the discarded equipment of his most feared soldiers, the Imperial Guard. For the British troops walking that field, it must have felt almost unreal. These were the men who had never lost. The men every European army had learned to fear for over a decade. And now their belongings lay scattered in the dirt like any defeated force. Among the debris were the towering fur caps the Imperial Guard had worn into battle, caps designed for exactly one purpose: to make an already elite soldier look even more massive, even more unstoppable, when seen from a distance through smoke and chaos. On a real battlefield where communication was shouted orders and visual signals, looking bigger wasn't vanity. It was a tactic. A soldier who appeared taller could shift the psychology of an entire enemy line before a single shot was fired. So when the British soldiers found these caps, something in them decided it wasn't enough to simply win. They wanted to carry a piece of that victory forward, physically, permanently, according to a story passed down through regimental history, one of those legends that sits somewhere between fact and battlefield. Folklore. The caps recovered that day still had their original white plumes. In the rush and pride of the moment, soldiers are said to have dipped those white plumes into the blood of the fallen French guardsmen. Whether every detail of that story happened exactly as told, no one can say for certain after 2 centuries. But what is certain is this: from that day forward, the plume worn by British Royal Guards has always been red. A small design choice with a violent, almost defiant origin story behind it. The British High Command wasted no time turning this battlefield trophy into official military dress. The 1st Regiment of Foot Guards, the very unit that had stood up out of the mud and broken the Imperial Guard's advance, had their entire uniform redesigned in the aftermath. Their old peaked caps, practical but forgettable, were retired. In their place came the same imposing fur headdress the French had worn into battle against them. It's worth sitting with how strange that decision really was. Britain didn't invent a new symbol of victory. They took their enemy's own symbol of intimidation and put it on their own heads instead, as if to say, "This is ours now, and so is everything it represented." There's one more twist buried in this story, a small clerical error that history simply never corrected. The victorious regiment was renamed the Grenadier Guards in honor of the battle. The only problem, the French unit they'd actually fought and defeated that day wasn't a grenadier unit at all. The Prince Regent had simply been informed, and incorrectly, that it was. By the time anyone might have questioned it, the name had already taken hold in official records, in public memory and tradition. 2 centuries later, the Grenadier Guards still carry a name built on a mistake nobody bothered to fix, a tradition that refused to fade. What started with one regiment didn't stay contained to one regiment for long. The bearskin cap had become something more than a uniform piece. It was now a mark of honor, a visible connection to Waterloo and everything that victory meant for Britain's standing in Europe. Other regiments wanted in. In 1831, 16 years after the battle, the privilege was extended to 2 more regiments, the Coldstream Guards and the Scots Guards. Both were established, respected units, and both were now permitted to wear the same fur caps that had once marked only the Grenadier Guards as Waterloo's victors. The tradition kept growing well beyond the soldiers who had actually fought that day. When the Irish Guards were raised as a new regiment in 1900, they too were given the bearskin. 15 years later, in 1915, the Welsh Guards were formed, and they received the same honor. By this point, the connection to the actual battle had become almost symbolic, a way of inducting new regiments into a lineage of prestige, rather than a literal reward for combat. For a surprisingly long time, these caps weren't just ceremonial. Soldiers actually wore them into real combat, including during the brutal Crimean War in the 1850s, decades after Waterloo. Imagine fighting in that era's chaos, muskets, cavalry charges, freezing conditions, with an 18-inch fur cap on your head. But warfare was changing fast. By the early 20th century, armies worldwide were shifting toward practical, muted khaki uniforms designed to help soldiers blend into terrain rather than stand out. The bearskin, by its very design, was the opposite of camouflage. Its days on an actual battlefield were numbered, so the cap transformed. It stopped being combat gear and became something else entirely. A living piece of ceremony, a walking monument to a moment in history that Britain had no intention of forgetting. Today, 5 regiments carry on this exact tradition: the Grenadier, Coldstream, Scots, Irish, and Welsh Guards. These are the same soldiers most people picture when they imagine the British monarchy's public image, standing motionless for hours outside Buckingham Palace, unblinking, seemingly unaffected by tourists posing for photos just inches away. It's one of the most recognizable and most photographed sights in the world, and very few of the millions who've snapped that photo know they're looking at a 200-year-old battlefield trophy. The hat itself there is an entire hidden world of detail in how these caps are actually made and maintained, and it's almost as interesting as the battle that created them. Each bearskin cap stands roughly 18 inches tall at the front, yet somehow weighs only about 1.5 pounds. Light enough that a soldier can stand at attention in it for hours without exhaustion setting in from the weight alone. That balance of height and lightness comes from stretching real bear fur over a basket-like internal frame, with an adjustable leather skullcap and chin strap keeping it secure. The fur itself comes from Canadian black bears, sourced through what the Ministry of Defense describes as legal, licensed hunts regulated by Canadian provincial and territorial governments. Officers' caps use a slightly different fur, from female brown bears, since their coats tend to be thicker and fuller, and those are simply dyed black to match. This detail alone has made the bearskin one of the more quietly controversial pieces of British ceremonial dress. Animal rights organizations have petitioned for years to have the caps replaced with synthetic alternatives, arguing there's no need for real fur in the 21st century. The Ministry of Defense has tested faux fur versions multiple times. So far, none have held up under real conditions. They lose their shape in strong wind and become waterlogged in heavy British rain, which is, ironically, a near-daily occurrence outside the palace gates where these guards stand. A single genuine bearskin cap costs around £650 to produce. But that cost is offset by remarkable durability. With proper care, one cap can last 25 years or more. Some caps have quietly outlived the very soldiers who first wore them, passed down and refitted for the next generation of guardsmen, still standing sentry long after their original owner has left the service. Still standing, So the next time someone sees a guardsman standing perfectly still outside a palace gate, tall black hat catching the light, indifferent to the crowd of phones raised around him, it's worth remembering what's actually sitting on his head. That hat isn't a costume, and it isn't just tradition for tradition's sake. It's a physical fragment of a battlefield from over 2 centuries ago. A moment when the fate of Europe hung on a single volley of musket fire, when an army that had never lost finally did. It's a name born from a misunderstanding, a red plume with a violent old legend behind it, and a design meant to intimidate on a battlefield that now simply stands watch over the quiet, ceremonial peace it helped create. 200 years later, it's still there, still standing, still remembering,